brothers and sisters, and friends, and I see some enemies. In fact, I think we'd be fooling ourselves if we had an audience this large and didn't realize that there were some enemies present.
What is a king? Why is a king? What presuppositions are involved in the idea that there should be or should not be kings? Kings, of course, are dominant human beings. Those who have authority because they can persuade other people to believe that they have authority. They are people who are so forceful in finding a way to go along that others say that is the way to follow. Actually, we do not really know whether they know the right way to go along. But they do it so convincingly that they convince others to follow that is the way. You see, as I've often said, this whole universe is really something like a Rorschach blot. Now, when we use the Rorschach blot in psychotherapy, every individual has a different response to it. But if you were to imagine a large number of people confronting a Rorschach blot projected on a screen, and they started discussing it as to what it is, there would be many different opinions and a great deal of confusion. But there would be some individual in the group who was particularly articulate and would say, but no, all these interpretations are wrong. Surely everybody can see that this is the way it is. And so you get the leader type. And although this is purely his own personal, private, subjective projection on the thing, he nevertheless, because of his power of speech, or it may be power of muscle, because he clubbers all the people who don't agree with him, persuades them that that's the way it is. So, right at the beginning of the whole notion of order, of law, of, law and order, as like everybody's talking about these days, law and order. I'm going to put something in brackets here. Just wait, let's suspend it for a moment. If you say it quickly, law and order, it's a properly mowed lawn and trim, which is one of the things that really has bugged me in my life. All these neatly mowed lawns. I could never bring myself to mow the lawn. I always want to see the grass grow and the dandelions come up. And I have a kind of fundamental objection to it. But now, that's the end of the bracket. The thing, law and order, comes back to the notion, you see, that there has got to be a fundamental consensus about the way this blot is to be considered. The wiggly universe, with all its wiggly rivers and mountains and stars and trees and vegetables and animals and people, have got to be agreed upon as to whether they're animal, whether they're vegetable, whether they're mineral, whether they're good, whether they're bad, whether they're fast, whether they're slow, whether they're big, whether they're little. And the consensus about this has come about in our ancient cultural institutions by the lawgivers, the great powerful kings of the ancient Near East, like Hammurabi, like Moses, like the pharaohs of Egypt, like the Cyruses of Persia. Because they said, and I'll put it in the words of the Hebrew prophets, I am the Lord and there is none else. Thou shalt have no other gods beside thee, for I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God. In other words, if you don't see it my way, I'll kick the shit out of you. And so powerful people of that kind arranged orders, got people to serve them, got them to perform their various duties, thought out, with some ingenuity, patterns of life according to which people might behave, and so introduced essentially armies, military organizations, grouped according to fighters, according to clerks, that is to say, bureaucrats and priests and book workers, according to merchants, and according to laborers. These are the four fundamental castes which occur in all these ancient agrarian societies. And therefore, the whole Hebrew Christian tradition carries within itself the conception of authority as kingly, the big boss, the big daddy, the big paternal figure who is in charge and who knows what to do and who brooks no insubordination. Thou shalt have no other gods but me. And today we find ourselves in an extraordinary and fundamental conflict with this idea of kingdom. Because as we see politically throughout the world, kings are on the wane. The British monarchy is in a pretty shaky state. It's the last, with Japan, the last really great monarchy in the world. And as distinct from that, you have different forms of government. You have the republican form of government, which is what we're supposed to have in the United States. And you have the military dictatorships of strong-arm boys who don't really claim to be kings. And you have various kinds of oligarchy of people who are fundamentally groups of gangsters in power. Actually, the government is always the most successful group of gangsters. But when they've been in power for a long, long time, everybody accepts them as the embodiments of virtuous law and order and justice, but only after they've been in power for a long, long time. Well, now you see the Republican government of the United States has been in existence for quite a long time, so that it has come to acquire a certain respectability, so that it can begin to act as if revolution against it were absolutely unthinkable, was treason, sedition, although this government itself started as treason and sedition against His Majesty the King of England, who had been in power, who was a set system for a long, long time, and therefore was accepted by the British as having a kind of divine authority. For many people in England today, the Queen still has a kind of divine aura. I was brought up in England. I was brought up at King's School in Canterbury, which is the center of the Church of England, where the Archbishop of Canterbury has his palace. Imagine the palace of a bishop. It really is a palace, too. I carried the Archbishop's train at his enthronement. That was Cosmo Gordon Lang, the man who had power enough to depose Edward VIII. And we felt, as we were brought up as little boys in the school, that we were being introduced into a very clear cosmological order. On top was God. And next down the line came His Son, Jesus Christ, who had conferred spiritual power upon His apostles, and the Archbishop of Canterbury was an immediate descendant of those apostles. And somehow the temporal power over against the Archbishop was the king. But the king, when he is crowned by the Archbishop and anointed by the Archbishop. The spiritual power always stands behind the temporal power, although the Archbishop takes second place to the king in a procession. He stands behind him. He doesn't go in front of him. The king is out front. See, he's the fall guy. for the Archbishop, for the spiritual power. But so in this way we felt, as little boys, that we were involved in a perfectly logical cosmological scheme. We felt that we knew our place. We knew where we were, what the order of things was. We goddamn well knew we were right. And that was the secret of the British Empire, until it lost its nerve. That every British people had a funny way of being aggressively non-aggressive, of being so secure in their rightness that they could afford the toleration of all kinds of eccentric and dissident people. That's why freedom of speech flourished, freedom of religion, after they really got down to it. They had a great deal of fights, you see, and up until the time of Queen Victoria, there was a lot of religious squabbling going on, but when they finally got settled down and they knew they were right, then they could make this tremendous empire with no qualms of conscience. Because after all, they were conferring the benefits of the right order of the universe upon all these poor, benighted heathens. Darwin helped them out enormously by his theory of evolution, which persuaded the white Western powers that they were the end product of a long process of evolution, and that all the black people and the colored people were somehow nearer to monkeys, and therefore not as civilized, and should be taken in hand and shown how to live. So we were brought up to have this feeling of complete security within a hierarchical cosmos, with the big boss God on top. But the big boss God was intimately connected with our daily lives. We lived under the shadow of this great cathedral. We did nothing, we had no assemblage, no meal without a preliminary grace. And so there was this feeling of security in authority in the kingdom. Now, for you people in the United States who are citizens of a republic, where it is actually against the law to have prayers in school, you are in a very different situation, because you don't know where you are. Now, that may be an excellent thing, not to know where you are, to have, in other words, a completely open mind about what is the hierarchy, what is the order scheme in which you're involved, what is the dynamic energy pattern of this thing we're living in. But initially, it results in an enormous amount of confusion, especially when a very large number of citizens of this republic believe that the universe is a monarchy. And that leads to an inner conflict. Because if the universe is a monarchy, obviously monarchy is the best form of government. How then can you have the nerve to say that a republic is the best form of government? And this conflict goes throughout American legal institutions and underlies today the conflict between the new boys and girls and the old boys and girls. I say old boys and girls because there are young people today under 30 who are still essentially dad's boys. They're football types with crew cuts who believe in respect for authority and are ready to punch in the heads of any of these long-haired, dirty, unwashed hippies who are creating all the trouble. See, the difficulty here is that there are too many people, too many young people especially, and all nations, that whenever they got too many young people, tend to find ways of getting rid of them, and very brutal ways. The old people send off their young into enormous war escapades, and that makes more room. And if it isn't a war, they find methods of identifying an enormous number of young people as subversive, revolutionary, or whatever, and they put them into concentration camps and starve them to death. Now, this is an old technique. And so, in other words, there is this perpetual conflict between the authority of the father and all the little children who eventually come up who dispute the father's way of life, who say, you, Dad, are all right, but you are not really very smart. And you haven't figured out how to live. And we'd like to change things around a bit. Why not? After all, when the spring comes and all the new flowers arrive, everybody's happy. They say, spring again, isn't that great? And they go out and walk and sniff the blossoms and see all the new life coming up. Nobody goes up to a crocus and wags its finger at it and say, you have got to understand how to be a crocus. Do your duty, etc. Grow up the proper way as a crocus. They trust it. They know that new crocuses will always grow up like crocuses, and they're glad of them. So in a rather similar way, when I see young people coming along, I think, I wonder what they've got by way of new ideas. What sort of amazing things they will think up because they're brighter than I am.